The massive chamber of the Galactic Council stretched beyond what human eyes could easily comprehend. Crystalline spires twisted upward into darkness, while bioluminescent panels cast an eerie blue glow across the assembled delegates. Representatives from 743 different species sat in their designated sections, their forms ranging from the barely visible energy beings of Zeta Prime to the massive, rock-like Garathians who required specialized gravity platforms just to attend. Ambassador Sarah Chun stood alone in the center of the circular chamber, her hands bound behind her back with energy shackles that hummed with alien technology. The small human looked insignificant compared to the towering alien forms around her, but her spine remained straight, and her chin lifted defiantly. She had known this moment would come eventually. Humanity had pushed too far, too fast for the Galactic Council's comfort. Ambassador Chun of the species known as humans, the voice of High Arbiter Velkash echoed through the chamber, translated instantly by neural implants into every known language. The Velkari was an ancient being, its form resembling a massive jellyfish made of living crystal floating above the central dais. Tentacles of pure energy flickered around its translucent body as it spoke. You stand accused of violating the sacred accords of non-interference, promoting dangerous technological proliferation, and inciting rebellion among subjugated species. How do you answer these charges? Sarah's voice carried clearly through the chamber despite her small stature. I answer that humanity has done nothing but extend the hand of friendship and cooperation to those who sought it. We have shared our knowledge freely and defended those who could not defend themselves. If that violates your accords, then your accords are wrong. A ripple of shocked chittering, growling, and electronic buzzing swept through the assembled delegates. The Theknari representative, a serpentine creature with multiple heads, raised itself up on its coils. Blasphemy! The sacred accords have maintained peace for 10,000 years. Peace? Sarah laughed bitterly. You mean the peace of slavery? The peace of watching advanced species exploit and abuse those who haven't developed faster than light travel yet. That's not peace, that's oppression with a fancy name. High Arbiter Velkash's energy tentacles flared brighter. The natural order maintains stability. Lesser species are protected under the guidance of their betters. Your species has disrupted this harmony, teaching primitive worlds to build weapons, sharing technology beyond their understanding, encouraging revolt. We taught them to defend themselves, Sarah shot back. We shared knowledge because knowledge belongs to everyone. We encouraged them to stand up for their rights because every sentient being deserves freedom. The chamber erupted in angry noise. The massive Garathian delegate slammed a rocky fist against his platform, creating a sound like thunder. Humans corrupt the natural order. They spread chaos wherever they go. The Kalari were happy under Theknari protection until humans filled their heads with nonsense about self-governance, hissed one of the serpent heads. Now they resist their rightful place in the hierarchy. The Benexi were peaceful farmers until humans taught them to build starships and weapons, rumbled a delegate whose form was hidden in a cloud of methane gas. Now they demand representation in their own system's government. Sarah looked around the chamber, meeting as many alien gazes as she could. You're right. We did teach them those things. We taught them that they don't have to accept being second-class citizens in their own worlds. We taught them that technology and knowledge shouldn't be hoarded by the powerful. We taught them that freedom is worth fighting for. And you have doomed them. Velkash's voice carried a tone of finality. The Kalari homeworld burns. The Benexi face orbital bombardment. The Yathani colonies have been stripped of their atmospheric processors. This is the result of your interference. For the first time, Sarah's composure cracked slightly. She had known about the Kalari situation, but the other reports were news to her. Millions of innocent beings were suffering because their own government had tried to help them. Those are war crimes, she whispered. Those are lawful corrections to an unnatural situation, the High Arbiter corrected. Species must know their place. The strong guide the weak. This has been the way since before your species learned to make fire. Then, maybe it's time for a new way, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger again. The chamber fell silent except for the ambient humming of life support systems and translation matrices. Every delegate stared at the small human woman who dared to challenge 10 millennia of established order. High Arbiter Velkash floated closer to the center platform. There will be no new way. Humanity has proven itself a cancer that must be excised before it spreads further. You personally, Ambassador Chun, have been identified as the primary architect of human interference policy. Your execution will send a clear message to your species and to any others who might consider following your path. Sarah straightened her shoulders. My death won't change anything. Humanity will continue to help those who seek help. We will continue to share knowledge with those who want to learn. We will continue to stand with those who fight for freedom. No, Velkash said simply. You will not. The High Arbiter gestured with one energy tentacle, and a section of the chamber floor began to rise, revealing an execution platform. The device was clearly alien, but unmistakably sinister. A collection of crystalline rods that pulsed with deadly energy. Sarah had heard descriptions of Valkyrie execution technology. It would disintegrate her at the molecular level while keeping her conscious and aware throughout the process. It was designed to be as terrifying and painful as possible. Wait, called a voice from the delegate sections. Sarah turned to see Ambassador Thrix of the Zalani Collective rising from his seat. The Zalani were one of the few species who had shown any friendship toward humanity, though they had remained officially neutral in council matters. Thrix looked like a tall, thin humanoid covered in blue-green scales, with large multifaceted eyes that could see across multiple light spectrums. High Arbiter, Thrix continued, while the Zalani Collective does not dispute the Council's authority to maintain order, we question the wisdom of executing a diplomatic representative. This action could be seen as a declaration of war against the human species. Let them see it however they wish, rumbled the Garathian delegate. Humanity has perhaps 50 worlds and maybe 200 starships. They are insects compared to the combined might of the Council. Insects that have managed to inspire rebellion on dozens of worlds in less than 50 years, Thrix pointed out. Perhaps it would be wiser to negotiate a peaceful resolution to this conflict. Velkash's tentacles writhed in what Sarah had learned was a sign of annoyance among the Valkyrie. The time for negotiation has passed. Humanity has shown that it cannot be trusted to follow galactic law. They must be made an example of. Sarah watched the exchange with growing dread. She had hoped that some of the more moderate species might speak up for humanity, but it was clear that fear of the Council's power outweighed any sympathy they might feel. The Galactic Council controlled trade routes, communication networks, and the advanced technology that most species depended on. Going against them was economic and technological suicide. Very well, Thrix said quietly, settling back into his seat. The Zalani Collective formally registers its objection to these proceedings, but will abide by the Council's decision. Noted and ignored, Velkash replied. Now, we proceed with the execution. Two enormous robots flanked Sarah, their forms clearly designed for intimidation rather than efficiency. They resembled mechanical spiders, each standing 3 meters tall, with multiple articulated arms ending in various tools and weapons. Their optical sensors glowed red as they scanned her for any signs of hidden weapons or escape devices. As the robots began to move her toward the execution platform, Sarah spoke again, her voice carrying throughout the chamber. You think this will end the problem? You think killing me and threatening my people will make everything go back to the way it was before. But you're wrong. You're about to make the biggest mistake in galactic history. Human arrogance, hissed the Theknari delegate. Even facing death, you cannot admit your inferiority. It's not arrogance, Sarah replied as the robots guided her up the steps to the platform. It's knowledge of my own species. You've studied our history, haven't you? You know what we're capable of when we're pushed too far. Velkash's tentacles pulsed brighter. We know you are a violent species, yes. This is why you must be contained or eliminated. Then, you should know, Sarah said as the execution device began to power up around her, that we don't forgive. We don't forget. And we never, ever give up. The energy rods surrounding the platform reached full power, bathing Sarah in deadly radiation. She gritted her teeth against the pain, but managed to speak one last time before the molecular disintegration began. Tell your children, and your children's children, she gasped, that this is the day the Galactic Council declared war on humanity. Tell them that Ambassador Sarah Chun died here today, and that her death will be answered. High Arbiter Velkash activated the final sequence, and Sarah Chun ceased to exist. The chamber remained silent for several minutes after the execution platform powered down and retracted into the floor. Finally, Velkash addressed the assembly. Let this serve as a warning to all species who might consider following humanity's path of disruption and chaos. The natural order will be maintained. The strong will guide the weak. This has been the way for 10,000 years, and it will continue for 10,000 more. But even as the High Arbiter spoke, deep space monitoring stations throughout the galaxy began detecting unusual energy signatures from the direction of human space. Long-range sensors registered massive movements of human vessels, previously unknown ship configurations, and what appeared to be the mobilization of humanity's entire industrial capacity. On Earth, President Maria Santos stood before the emergency session of the United Earth Council, her face grim as she addressed the assembled representatives. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began. 3 hours ago, our ambassador to the Galactic Council was executed without trial, without appeal, and without mercy. Sarah Chun died because she stood for the principles we hold sacred: freedom, equality, and the right of all sentient beings to determine their own destiny. The chamber was silent except for the quiet hum of recording devices capturing every word for posterity. The Galactic Council believes that by murdering our representative, they have sent us a message about our place in their hierarchy. They believe they have demonstrated their power and our weakness. They believe we will submit to their will rather than face their superior numbers and technology. President Santos paused, looking out at the faces of humanity's leaders. They are about to learn how very wrong they are. The vote was unanimous. For the first time in its history, humanity was going to war not for resources, not for territory, not for ideology, but for something far more dangerous, for principle. And, unlike the Galactic Council's carefully managed conflicts between primitive species, this would be a war between technological equals, fought with the fury of a species that had just watched one of their own die for the crime of helping others. The age of galactic peace was about to end, and it would be humanity that brought it to its close. Sarah Chun's execution had lit a fire that would burn across the stars, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. In the depths of space, human ships began to move with purpose and coordination that surprised even their builders. The war for galactic freedom was about to begin. Admiral Rebecca Martinez stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, humanity's newest and most advanced warship, watching the tactical display with grim satisfaction. 3 months had passed since Sarah Chun's execution, 3 months of preparation that had surprised even the humans themselves with its speed and efficiency. The ship around her represented everything humanity had learned from decades of careful observation and analysis of Galactic Council technology, combined with their own innovative approaches to warfare. "Ma'am," called Lieutenant Commander Jackson from the communications station, "we're receiving final confirmation from all task forces. Operation Prometheus is ready to commence." Rebecca nodded, her weathered face showing no emotion. At 55, she had served in humanity's small but efficient navy for 30 years, most of that time spent on exploration and diplomatic missions. She had never expected to command a fleet going to war against the entire galaxy. But then, again, she had never expected to watch a recording of her friend and colleague being tortured to death on an alien execution device. "Signal all vessels," she ordered. "Execute Prometheus. Time to show the galaxy what happens when you murder our diplomats." Across human space, the largest military operation in the species' history began to unfold. It wasn't just the size of the fleet that would have shocked galactic observers, though the 2,000 warships that had been constructed in secret over the past decade was impressive enough. It was the technology those ships carried, technology that had been developed in hidden research facilities far from the prying sensors of Council monitoring stations. The humans had learned much in their 50 years of membership in the galactic community. They had studied every piece of Council technology they could get their hands on, reverse-engineered what they could understand, and improved upon what they couldn't. But, more importantly, They had identified the fundamental weaknesses in a system that had remained unchanged for millennia. The Galactic Council's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness, its stability. For 10,000 years, galactic warfare had followed predictable patterns. Advanced species would use overwhelming force to crush primitive rebels, orbital bombardments would break resistance, and the survivors would submit to the natural order. It was efficient, cost-effective, and had never failed. But it had never been tested against a species that understood the rules and refused to play by them. Captain Sarah Kim watched from the bridge of the UES Vengeance as her strike force dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Theknari home system. The Serpentine species had been among the most vocal supporters of Ambassador Chen's execution, and their home system was heavily defended with what the Council considered state-of-the-art technology. Contact, called her sensor officer. 12 Theknari battle cruisers moving to intercept, along with what looks like 40 smaller vessels. Sarah smiled coldly. The Theknari were following standard Council doctrine. Establish a defensive perimeter, demand surrender, and then systematically destroy the attacking force with superior firepower. It had worked against every primitive species that had ever dared to rebel. All ships, maintain current approach vector, she ordered. Do not return fire until they open hostilities. Ma'am, her tactical officer said nervously. Their weapons are charging. Those battle cruisers mount Class 7 disruptors. They could cut us apart. Let them make the first move, Sarah replied calmly. We want this recorded properly. The lead Theknari vessel opened communications, and the bridge screens filled with the image of a massive serpentine head, its multiple eyes blazing with arrogance. Human vessels, you are in violation of Galactic Council space. Withdraw immediately or face destruction. Sarah leaned forward in her command chair. This is Captain Sarah Kim of the United Earth Ship Vengeance. We are here to discuss the murder of Ambassador Sarah Chun and the war crimes committed against the Kalari, Benexi, and Yathani peoples. We demand the immediate surrender of all Theknari military forces and the arrest of your government leadership for crimes against sentient life. The Theknari captain's laugh was a horrible hissing sound. Primitive mammals think they can make demands of their betters? You have 20 standard minutes to leave this system before we demonstrate the price of human arrogance. The communication cut off, and Sarah turned to her weapons officer. You heard him. We have 20 minutes. Use the time to get targeting solutions on all Council vessels. But the humans weren't planning to wait 20 minutes. As the Theknari fleet moved into standard battle formation, the human ships began to exhibit behavior that confused and alarmed the Council forces. Instead of forming up for a traditional engagement, the human vessels spread out in seemingly random patterns, maintaining course for the inner system while appearing to ignore the approaching enemy entirely. Human ships are not responding to our positioning, reported the Theknari tactical officer. They appear to be heading directly for the home world. Fools, the Serpentine captain hissed. They think to bypass our fleet and strike at civilian targets. Open fire. Show them the fate of all who threaten the natural order. The Theknari battle cruisers unleashed their full firepower, 12 beams of devastating energy lancing out toward the leading human vessels. The Class 7 disruptors were among the most powerful weapons in the Council arsenal, capable of vaporizing a mountain or punching through the shields of any known warship. They struck the human vessels and simply stopped. Impossible, the Theknari captain snarled. Sensors report. Sir, his tactical officer's voice was uncertain. The human ships appear to be protected by some form of adaptive shielding. Our weapons are having no effect. What the Theknari couldn't know was that humanity had spent decades studying Council weapon systems, identifying the specific energy frequencies and patterns used by each major species. The adaptive shields on the human ships were specifically designed to counter every known weapon in the Council arsenal. It was the kind of long-term strategic thinking that the Council, with its focus on maintaining the status quo, had never needed to develop. All human vessels, Sarah's voice cut across the tactical networks. You are clear to engage. Show them what happens when you execute our people. The response was immediate and devastating. Instead of the energy weapons that dominated galactic warfare, the human ships opened fire with kinetic weapons, railguns that accelerated metal slugs to incredible velocities using magnetic acceleration. The Theknari shields, designed to deflect energy weapons, were completely useless against solid projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed. The first Theknari battle cruiser simply ceased to exist as a dozen tungsten slugs, each weighing several tons, tore through its hull. The second vessel tried to maneuver, but the human targeting systems, based on hundreds of years of warfare against their own species, had no trouble tracking and destroying a ship that was following predictable evasion patterns. Within minutes, the entire Theknari defensive fleet had been reduced to expanding clouds of debris. But the humans weren't finished. As the surviving Theknari vessels retreated toward their home world, the human fleet continued its advance, broadcasting on all frequencies. "Attention, Theknari government," Captain Kim's voice echoed through the system. "Your military forces have been neutralized. You have 1 hour to surrender all individuals responsible for the execution of Ambassador Chun and the genocide of subject species. Failure to comply will result in the total destruction of your orbital infrastructure." The response from the Theknari home world was predictably defiant. "Human scum, you dare threaten the Theknari Imperium? We have ruled this system for 8,000 years. We will never bow to inferior mammals." Sarah checked her chronometer. 59 minutes remaining, she announced. While the drama played out in the Theknari system, similar scenes were occurring across the galaxy. Human strike forces had simultaneously attacked 17 different systems, all of them belonging to species that had voted for or actively supported Ambassador Chen's execution. The coordination required for such an operation was staggering, but humanity had learned the value of coordinated action from their own bloody history. In the Garathian home system, massive rock-like ships found themselves unable to cope with human vessels that moved like fighters but hit like battleships. The Garathians had always relied on their heavy armor and powerful shields, but human weapons were designed to exploit the specific weaknesses of their technology. In the Valkyrie core worlds, the ancient energy beings discovered that their traditional tactics of overwhelming enemies with superior technology were useless against opponents who had studied their methods for decades and developed specific countermeasures. And in the Outer Rim territories, human forces began doing something that shocked the galaxy. They were liberating the oppressed species that the Council had held down for millennia. Commander Elena Rodriguez led the task force that struck the Benexi system, where the native population was being systematically exterminated for their rebellion against Theknari rule. Her ships arrived to find orbital bombardment platforms raining death on the planet below, while Benexi defensive forces fought a desperate and losing battle against overwhelming odds. "All ships, priority targets are the bombardment platforms," she ordered. "We need to stop the genocide first, then deal with the military forces." The human intervention was swift and decisive. Kinetic weapons tore through the bombardment platforms like tissue paper, while adaptive shields rendered the Council forces' return fire ineffective. Within hours, the sky above the Benexi home world was clear of hostile vessels. But it was what happened next that would become legend throughout the galaxy. Instead of claiming the system for humanity or demanding tribute, Commander Rodriguez did something unprecedented in galactic history. She handed control of the system's defense back to the Benexi themselves, along with human weapons and technology to ensure they could defend their freedom. The Galactic Council claims that primitive species need to be guided by their betters, she announced to the assembled Benexi leadership. Humanity believes that every sentient species has the right to determine its own destiny. We give you the tools to defend that right. What you do with them is up to you. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy as human forces systematically dismantled the Council's apparatus of oppression. Advanced weapons technology was shared freely with liberated species. Human advisors helped newly free worlds establish their own governments. Most shocking of all, humanity refused to claim any territory or demand any tribute for their actions. It was a completely alien concept to species that had known only domination and submission for 10,000 years. Back at the Galactic Council chambers, High Arbiter Velkash floated in emergency session with the remaining delegates who hadn't fled to defend their home worlds. The ancient energy being's tentacles writhed in agitation as reports continued to arrive of human victories across the galaxy. "How is this possible?" demanded the Zephyrian representative, a cloud of sentient gas that shimmered with panic. "Our technology is superior. Our numbers are overwhelming. How can these primitive mammals be defeating us?" "They're not fighting like primitives," observed Ambassador Thrix of the Zolani Collective, one of the few voices of reason remaining in the chamber. "They're fighting like a species that has studied us carefully and prepared specifically for this war." "Impossible," screeched the avian delegate, a massive bird-like creature whose species had ruled through terror for 3 millennia. "No inferior species could understand our technology well enough to counter it so effectively." But Thrix's multifaceted eyes had been studying the tactical reports with growing understanding. "They didn't just understand our technology," he said quietly. "They understood us. They know how we think, how we fight, how we've always fought. And they prepared for everything." The realization was sinking in throughout the chamber. For 10,000 years, the Galactic Council had maintained power through superior technology and coordinated action against divided, primitive enemies. They had never faced an opponent that matched their technology and exceeded their coordination. They had certainly never faced an opponent that seemed to have no interest in personal gain or territorial expansion. "What do they want?" Velkash's voice carried a note of something the ancient being had never experienced before: uncertainty. The answer came from an unexpected source. The chamber's communication system activated, and the image of Admiral Rebecca Martinez appeared on the main screen. Behind her, the bridge of the UES Retribution was a hive of activity as humanity's war effort continued to unfold. "High Arbiter Velkash." Rebecca's voice was calm and professional. "Members of the Galactic Council, I am Admiral Rebecca Martinez, Supreme Commander of the United Earth Defense Force. I'm contacting you to discuss terms for ending this conflict." "Terms?" Velkash's tentacles flared with outrage. "You attack our member species without provocation and then speak of terms? You will withdraw your forces immediately and submit to Council authority." Rebecca's expression didn't change. "High Arbiter, let me clarify something for you. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification. You executed our ambassador for the crime of helping oppressed species gain their freedom. You declared war on humanity with that action. We are simply responding in kind. Your forces cannot hope to defeat the combined might of the Council," shrieked the avian delegate. "Actually," Rebecca replied with a slight smile, "we already have. In the last 6 hours, human forces have achieved total victory in 17 different systems, liberated 42 oppressed species, and are currently advancing on another 30 Council strongholds. Your combined might appears to be considerably less mighty than you believed." The chamber fell silent except for the ambient noise of life support systems and the quiet panic of delegates trying to contact their home worlds. "What are your terms?" Thrix asked quietly. Rebecca consulted a data pad before responding. "The immediate dissolution of the Galactic Council as a governing body. The establishment of a new galactic forum based on equality between species rather than hierarchy. The trial of all individuals responsible for genocide, slavery, and other crimes against sentient life. And, most importantly, the guarantee that no species will ever again be denied the right to determine its own destiny." Preposterous. Velkash's energy form flared brighter. "The natural order cannot be overturned. The strong must guide the weak." "High Arbiter." Rebecca's voice carried a note of finality. "The natural order you're so fond of ended the moment you murdered Sarah Chun. What comes next depends on whether you choose to accept the new reality or continue to fight against it." The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in chaos as delegates argued, fled, or simply sat in stunned silence. The age of galactic peace had indeed ended, but it was being replaced by something even more revolutionary: the age of galactic freedom. And, across the stars, human ships continued their advance, carrying with them a message that no tyranny in galactic history had ever had to face: that freedom was worth fighting for, that oppression would not be tolerated, and that sometimes the right thing to do was the most dangerous thing of all. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity meant when they said they never forgave, never forgot, and never gave up. 6 months after the execution of Ambassador Sarah Chun, the Galactic Council's 10,000-year reign was crumbling faster than anyone could have predicted. Admiral Rebecca Martinez stood in the command center of Olympus Station, humanity's newest and largest military installation, watching real-time tactical displays that showed the current state of the galaxy. Red markers indicated systems still under Council control, green showed liberated worlds now protected by human forces, and yellow marked systems where fighting was still ongoing. The green significantly outnumbered the red. Admiral, called Captain Chinwei, no relation to the murdered ambassador, but someone who had specifically requested assignment to the war effort when he learned her name. We're receiving surrender requests from 12 more systems. The Altarian Federation wants to discuss terms, and the Centauran Alliance is asking for human protection from Council retaliation. Rebecca nodded grimly. The pattern had become familiar over the past months. As human forces demonstrated their overwhelming technological and tactical superiority, more and more Council member species were choosing to abandon the sinking ship rather than go down with it. But these weren't the species that truly mattered. Any word from the core worlds? She asked. Captain Chun checked his displays. The Velkari, Theknari, and Garathian governments are still refusing all communication. Intelligence suggests they're mobilizing for a final coordinated counterattack. Of course they are, Rebecca muttered. The three species that had dominated the Galactic Council for millennia weren't going to give up their power without a fight to the death. They had built their entire civilizations around the concept of natural hierarchy, and accepting human demands for equality would mean admitting that their fundamental worldview was wrong. Ma'am, another voice called out. Priority message from Admiral Harrison's task force in the Rigel sector. The main display switched to show Admiral David Harrison, commanding officer of the Third Fleet, currently engaged in liberating the Outer Rim territories. His usually calm demeanor was strained, and Rebecca could see the stress of months of constant warfare in his eyes. Rebecca, he began without preamble, we've got a problem. The Council isn't just mobilizing for a counterattack. They're implementing scorched earth protocols. We've intercepted communications indicating that they're preparing to destroy any world they can't hold, rather than let it fall into human hands. Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. Clarify destroy, David. Complete sterilization. They're moving planet-killer weapons towards 17 different systems, all of them populated by species that have declared independence from Council authority. We're talking about genocide on an unprecedented scale, not just the punishment of a few rebellious worlds, but the total elimination of entire species that have chosen freedom over submission. The command center fell silent except for the quiet hum of electronics and the soft breathing of the assembled staff. Rebecca stared at the tactical display, her mind racing through the implications. This was exactly the kind of escalation that humanity had hoped to avoid, but perhaps it was inevitable. The Galactic Council had maintained power for 10,000 years through the implicit threat of overwhelming violence. Now that their bluff was being called, they were preparing to make good on that threat in the most horrific way possible. How long do we have? Rebecca asked. Our best estimate is 72 hours before the first planet killer reaches the Calari system. The others will follow in sequence over the next 2 weeks. Rebecca turned to her staff. Signal all fleet commanders. I want every available ship prepared for immediate deployment. We're about to face the real war. The next 72 hours would prove to be the most crucial in galactic history. Human forces, already stretched thin across hundreds of systems, suddenly found themselves racing against time to prevent the greatest genocide in recorded history. It wasn't just about military victory anymore. It was about saving billions of innocent lives from rulers who preferred to destroy what they couldn't control. Captain Sarah Kim, now commanding the Retribution-class battleship UES Defiance, found herself leading a desperate attack on the Velkari core worlds. The ancient energy beings had positioned their planet-killer weapons in their most heavily defended system, protected by technology that had remained unchanged for millennia because it had never needed to change. Contact, her tactical officer reported as they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Velkari system. I'm reading. Jesus Christ. Report, Lieutenant, Sarah ordered sharply. Ma'am, I'm detecting over 3,000 vessels in defensive formation around the primary world. Battle cruisers, dreadnoughts, and what looks like their entire home fleet, plus 17 orbital defense platforms, and he paused, double-checking his readings. Ma'am, I'm also detecting the energy signature of a void engine. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Void engines were theoretical weapons of such devastating power that even the Council had supposedly banned their construction. The main screen filled with the image of High Arbiter Velkash itself, the ancient energy being's form crackling with barely controlled power. Human vessels, you approach sacred space. Withdraw immediately, or witness the price of defying the natural order. Sarah leaned forward in her command chair. High Arbiter, this is Captain Sarah Kim of the United Earth ship Defiance. We know about your planet killer weapons. We know about your plans to commit genocide rather than accept galactic freedom. Stand down now, and we might be able to work out a peaceful solution. Peace. Velkash's tentacles writhed with alien laughter. There can be no peace with a species that seeks to destroy the foundations of civilized society. You have corrupted the natural order, turned children against their parents, slaves against their rightful masters. If we cannot restore balance, then balance must be restored through fire. So that's your final answer? Sarah asked. Genocide. Correction, Velkash replied. Purification. The galaxy will be cleansed of the chaos you have brought, and, from the ashes, the natural order will rise again. The communication cut off, and Sarah turned to her weapons officer. All ships, you are cleared to engage. Show them what happens when you threaten innocent lives in the name of your natural order. What followed was the largest space battle in recorded galactic history, and also the shortest. The Valkyrie had spent 10,000 years perfecting weapons designed to overwhelm primitive opponents through superior technology. They had never developed tactics for fighting an enemy that matched their technology while exceeding their coordination and strategic thinking. Human ships moved through the Valkyrie formations like dancers, their adaptive shields rendering the ancient energy weapons useless, while their kinetic weapons tore through defenses that had never been designed to stop solid projectiles. The orbital defense platforms, massive structures that had protected the Valkyrie home world for millennia, were systematically destroyed by coordinated attacks that exploited weaknesses the humans had identified through decades of careful observation. But it was the Void engine that presented the greatest challenge. The massive weapon, built into the surface of an artificial moon, was approaching full charge and would soon be capable of destabilizing the system's star. Even if the human fleet achieved total victory, they would all die when the star went nova. Ma'am, called Lieutenant Commander Jackson from the engineering station, we're receiving a tight beam transmission from Earth. It's flagged as Project Prometheus data. Sarah smiled grimly. Project Prometheus, humanity's ultimate contingency plan, developed in secret over the past decade for exactly this kind of scenario. Put it through to the main computer and prepare to execute on my command. The data transfer took only seconds, but what it contained represented years of theoretical research and engineering innovation. Deep in the bowels of the UES Defiance, automated systems began implementing instructions that would have seemed impossible to any other species in the galaxy. All ships, fall back to minimum safe distance, Sarah ordered. Prepare to witness the power of human ingenuity. The Defiance began to glow as exotic energy fields built up around its hull. Similar phenomena were occurring throughout the human fleet as each ship activated systems that had been installed in the deepest secrecy and tested only in computer simulations. The technology was based on humanity's understanding of quantum mechanics and space-time manipulation, fields of study that the tradition-bound Council species had never bothered to explore. Captain, her science officer called out, the quantum field generators are approaching critical resonance. We'll be ready to execute in 30 seconds. On the surface of the artificial moon, the Void engine reached full charge and began its firing sequence. Energy readings spiked to levels that should have been impossible to contain, while space-time itself began to warp under the strain of forces that could tear apart the fabric of reality. Now, Sarah whispered. Every human ship in the fleet simultaneously activated their quantum field generators, creating a localized distortion in space-time that redirected the void engine's energy back upon itself. Instead of reaching out to destabilize the star, the weapon's incredible power was turned inward, creating a miniature black hole that consumed the artificial moon, the weapon, and a significant portion of the Valkyrie fleet. The effect on the remaining Council forces was immediate and devastating. Faced with technology they couldn't understand, deployed by tactics they had never encountered, the ancient rulers of the galaxy finally began to grasp the magnitude of their miscalculation. "This is impossible," Velkash's voice carried across the communication channels, no longer authoritative but bewildered. "How can inferior beings command such power?" "We're not inferior," Sarah replied simply. "We're just different. And we're done being told our place by those who think might makes right." Similar scenes played out across the galaxy as human forces systematically dismantled the Council's last desperate attempts to maintain power through genocide. In the Theknari core systems, Admiral Harrison's Third Fleet prevented the destruction of the Benexi worlds by using captured Council technology against its creators. In the Garathian territories, human special forces teams infiltrated planet killer facilities and sabotaged the weapons from within. But perhaps the most significant battle took place not in space, but in the chambers of galactic communication networks, where humanity fought a different kind of war, a war for hearts and minds. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, humanity's chief xenopsychologist, had been working around the clock to coordinate what she called Operation Understanding. Instead of simply defeating Council forces militarily, the humans were broadcasting detailed explanations of their actions, their motivations, and their ultimate goals to every inhabited world in the galaxy. "Fellow sentients," her voice carried across thousands of star systems in hundreds of different languages. "For 10,000 years, you have been told that the strong must rule the weak, that some species are naturally superior to others, that freedom and equality are dangerous concepts that lead to chaos and destruction. We are here to tell you that this is a lie." The broadcasts included detailed documentation of Council crimes, evidence of genocide and oppression, and testimony from liberated species about life under Council rule versus life with human protection. But, more importantly, they included something that no galactic power had ever offered before, a genuine alternative to the existing order. "Humanity offers not domination, but partnership," Dr. Harper continued. "Not hierarchy, but cooperation. Not the rule of the strong over the weak, but the mutual support of equals working together for the common good. We do not ask you to submit to our authority. We ask you to join us in building a galaxy where every species can determine its own destiny." The response was overwhelming. Species that had submitted to Council rule for millennia suddenly began to question the foundations of their society. Worlds that had never dared to resist their betters started demanding representation and rights. Most importantly, Council member species began to defect en masse as they realized that their traditional rulers were prepared to commit genocide rather than accept change. Within weeks, the Galactic Council found itself ruling over empty chambers, while their former subjects flocked to join what humans were calling the Galactic Federation, a voluntary alliance of equal partners working together for mutual benefit and protection. High Arbiter Velkash, one of the last surviving Council leaders, made one final broadcast from the ruined remains of the Valkyrie homeworld. "This is not over," the ancient being declared, its energy form flickering with exhaustion and defeat. "The natural order is eternal. Chaos cannot rule forever. The strong will rise again." The response came not from human leadership, but from Ambassador Thrix of the Zelani Collective, speaking on behalf of the newly formed Galactic Federation. "Velkash," he said sadly, "the natural order you speak of was never natural at all. It was simply the oldest tyranny in galactic history, maintained through fear and violence. That age is ending. What comes next will be built on freedom, equality, and the simple recognition that every sentient being deserves the chance to reach their full potential." As the transmission ended, the last of the Council's planet killer weapons was destroyed by a joint human-Zelani task force, marking the end of the most dangerous phase of the Galactic War. But, as Admiral Martinez looked out at the tactical displays showing the new political situation, she knew that the real work was just beginning. Winning a war was one thing. Building a just and lasting peace was something else entirely. And for the first time in galactic history, they were going to try to do it without conquest, without domination, and without forcing anyone to accept human authority. It was a radical experiment that would test everything humanity claimed to believe about freedom, equality, and the rights of sentient beings. But, as Sarah Chun had said before her execution, humanity never gave up. They were going to keep fighting for their principles even after the shooting stopped. The age of galactic tyranny was over. The age of galactic democracy was about to begin. 2 years had passed since the fall of the Galactic Council, and Admiral Rebecca Martinez was discovering that winning a war was significantly easier than building a lasting peace. She stood in the observation deck of Unity Station, the massive diplomatic facility that had been constructed at the Galactic Center to serve as headquarters for the new Galactic Federation. Through the reinforced transparent aluminum windows, she could see ships from dozens of different species docking at the station's numerous ports: Solani research vessels, Benexi cargo haulers, human escort destroyers, and even a few converted Theknari diplomatic craft. It should have been a scene of triumph, but Rebecca's expression was troubled. The reports scattered across the table behind her told a different story than the peaceful diversity visible outside. The council might have been defeated, but not everyone in the galaxy was ready to accept the new order. "Admiral," called Dr. Elizabeth Harper as she entered the observation deck, carrying yet another stack of intelligence reports. The xenopsychologist looked exhausted, her usually neat appearance disheveled from months of dealing with the complex aftermath of galactic revolution. "I'm afraid I have more bad news." Rebecca turned from the window with a sigh. "Let me guess. The Garathian resistance has struck again." "Worse," Elizabeth replied, setting the reports on the table. "We've confirmed that the various resistance movements are coordinating their activities. The Garathian Remnant, the Valkyrie Revival Movement, the Theknari Imperial Guards, they're all working together now. And they're being led by someone with extensive knowledge of both human tactics and Federation weaknesses." Rebecca picked up the top report and scanned its contents, her frown deepening with each line. Over the past year, a series of terrorist attacks had targeted Federation facilities and liberated worlds. The attacks were sophisticated, well-planned, and devastatingly effective. Worse, they specifically targeted the human military advisors and diplomats who were helping newly independent species establish their own governments. "Any luck identifying their leadership?" Rebecca asked. Elizabeth shook her head. "They're calling themselves the Order of the Natural Law, and their leader uses the title the Hierarch. Intelligence suggests it might be a surviving council member, but we can't be certain. What we do know is that they're not just trying to restore the old order. They're trying to prove that human-style democracy inevitably leads to chaos and destruction." As if to emphasize her point, an alert tone sounded throughout the station. Rebecca activated the nearest communication panel, and Captain Chun Wei's voice filled the observation deck. "Admiral, we're receiving priority distress calls from 3 different systems. The Kalari home world is reporting coordinated attacks on their new government facilities. The Yathani colonies are under assault by what appears to be a combined force of Garathian and Valkyrie ships." And he paused, his voice grim. "Ma'am, we're also getting reports of a major strike against the Benexi Federation Council. Early estimates suggest heavy casualties among the civilian leadership." Rebecca closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. These were the same species that humanity had fought to liberate, the same worlds where Ambassador Sarah Chun had given her life to defend freedom and self-determination. Now they were being targeted specifically because they had chosen to embrace democratic government over authoritarian rule. "Dispatch task forces to all 3 systems," she ordered. "Priority goes to civilian protection and humanitarian aid. We can hunt the attackers later." "Already done, ma'am," Captain Chun replied. "But, Admiral, this is the 7th coordinated strike this month. Our forces are stretched thin, and the resistance movements seem to know exactly when and where to hit us for maximum effect." Rebecca exchanged a meaningful look with Dr. Harper. They had both been thinking the same thing for weeks, but neither had wanted to voice it. The level of intelligence that the resistance movements were displaying suggested they had access to Federation communication networks, tactical databases, or both. There was almost certainly a traitor somewhere in the Federation hierarchy. "Captain, implement Security Protocol 7 immediately," Rebecca ordered. "All sensitive communications are to be restricted to quantum-encrypted channels only. And I want a full security review of all personnel with access to tactical planning data." "Understood, ma'am." As the communication ended, Elizabeth moved to the window and stared out at the diverse fleet of ships surrounding Unity Station. "Rebecca," she said quietly, "what if they're right? What if we've started something we can't finish?" "Explain." "The resistance movements, the order of the natural law. Their central argument is that freedom and equality are unnatural concepts that inevitably lead to chaos and conflict. They point to these attacks, to the difficulties we're having establishing stable governments on liberated worlds, to the economic disruption caused by dismantling the Council's trade monopolies. What if they're right? What if the old system, tyrannical as it was, actually provided a kind of stability that we can't match?" Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. It was one that had haunted her in the dark hours of the night, when casualty reports and diplomatic crises made her wonder if humanity had made a terrible mistake in declaring war on the established order. "Elizabeth," she finally said, "do you remember why we started this war?" "Sarah Chen's execution." "No," Rebecca replied firmly. "That was the trigger, but it wasn't the cause. We started this war because we discovered that the stability the Council provided was built on the systematic oppression, exploitation, and occasional genocide of anyone who didn't fit their definition of the natural order. The Kalari were being enslaved. The Benexi were being exterminated. The Yathani were being used as forced labor. That's not stability. That's institutionalized horror." She turned from the window to face the xenopsychologist directly. "Yes, building a free and democratic galaxy is difficult. Yes, there are growing pains and setbacks and people who want to go back to the old ways. But the alternative is accepting that some species deserve to be slaves because they're not advanced enough to govern themselves. I will never accept that." Elizabeth nodded slowly. "I know you're right. It's just, when I see the casualty reports, when I read about children dying in these attacks, I sometimes wonder if there might have been another way." "There might have been," Rebecca admitted. "But the Council chose their path when they executed Sarah Chun instead of negotiating. We're dealing with the consequences of their decision as much as our own." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Ambassador Thrix, the Zalani diplomat, who had become one of humanity's closest allies in the new Federation government. His blue-green scales showed signs of stress discoloration, and his large multifaceted eyes were dim with exhaustion. "Admiral Martinez, Dr. Harper," he said in his precise, translated voice, "I bring troubling news from the Federation Council session. The Altarian representative has formally requested the withdrawal of human military advisors from his system. The Centauran Alliance is considering a similar motion." And he paused, clearly reluctant to continue. "The Rigelian Trade Confederation has announced they are suspending their membership in the Federation pending a comprehensive security review." Rebecca felt her stomach sink. The Rigelian Trade Confederation represented 43 different species and controlled some of the most important trade routes in the galaxy. Their withdrawal from the Federation would be a major economic and political blow, but, more importantly, it would signal to other species that the human experiment in galactic democracy might be failing. "What's driving this?" she asked. "Fear," Thrix replied simply. "The resistance attacks are having exactly the effect they were designed to have. Species that joined the Federation for protection are beginning to believe that association with humans makes them targets rather than keeping them safe. They are starting to think that perhaps the old ways, however oppressive, were at least predictable." Dr. Harper spread the intelligence reports across the table. "Ambassador, take a look at these attack patterns. The resistance isn't just trying to cause casualties or destroy infrastructure. They're specifically targeting symbols of democratic government and human Federation cooperation. They're trying to prove that our way of doing things doesn't work." Thrix studied the reports with his precise, analytical mind. "They are succeeding," he observed sadly. "Each attack undermines confidence in Federation protection and human leadership. Even species that enthusiastically embraced independence are beginning to question whether the benefits outweigh the costs. Rebecca moved to the central planning hologram that dominated the observation deck, calling up a tactical display of the entire galaxy. Red markers showed systems where resistance attacks had occurred. Yellow indicated worlds considering withdrawal from the Federation, and green represented stable member species. The amount of red and yellow was increasing steadily. They're not just coordinating their military attacks, she realized aloud. This is a comprehensive political strategy. The Order of the Natural Law is trying to recreate the Council's authority through fear and manipulation, but they're doing it more cleverly than the original Council ever did. How so? Elizabeth asked. The old Council ruled through direct force, submit or be destroyed. But the Order is using the resistance attacks to make people choose between freedom with uncertainty or security under tyranny. They're making the choice look rational instead of coerced. Thrix's eye patterns shifted to what Rebecca had learned indicated deep concern among his species. If they succeed in undermining confidence in the Federation, if enough species withdraw or refuse to join, then they will not need to rebuild the Council's military power. They can simply present themselves as the only viable alternative to chaos and wait for desperate species to come to them voluntarily. The implications were staggering. Humanity had spent 2 years fighting to build a galaxy based on freedom and cooperation. But if they couldn't provide effective protection for their allies, all their efforts would be undone without the resistance movements firing another shot. Worse, the failure of the Federation would be used as evidence that democratic government was inherently unsuitable for galactic civilization. We need to catch their leadership, Rebecca decided. If we can decapitate the Order of the Natural Law and prove that the attacks are being coordinated by remnants of the old regime, we might be able to shore up support for the Federation. Agreed, Thrix said, but how? They have demonstrated superior intelligence gathering capabilities and operational security. Our attempts to infiltrate their organizations have failed repeatedly. Rebecca studied the tactical display, her mind working through the problem from multiple angles. As she watched the red markers representing resistance attacks, a pattern began to emerge that hadn't been obvious before. The attacks weren't just targeting Federation assets. They were specifically targeting locations where human advisors were working with newly independent species to establish democratic institutions. They're not just trying to prove democracy doesn't work, she said slowly. They're trying to prove that humans can't protect their allies. Every successful attack demonstrates Federation weakness and makes other species question whether association with us is worth the risk. Elizabeth looked up from the intelligence reports. If you're right, then they'll need to escalate. The current level of attacks is causing political damage, but it's not enough to break the Federation completely. They'll need to do something bigger, more dramatic, something that proves beyond doubt that humanity can't protect its friends. As if summoned by her words, Captain Chen's voice filled the observation deck again. But this time his tone carried an urgency that made all 3 listeners freeze. Admiral, priority flash message from Earth Command. Intelligence has intercepted order communications indicating they're planning a major strike against Unity Station itself. Estimated time to arrival, 6 hours. Ma'am, they're coming here with everything they have left. Rebecca felt a cold smile spread across her face. After months of playing defense, reacting to attacks, and trying to predict where the resistance would strike next, their enemies had finally made a strategic mistake. By attacking Unity Station directly, the Order of the Natural Law was abandoning their guerrilla tactics and committing to a direct confrontation with the full strength of the Federation fleet. Captain, she said calmly, signal all Federation vessels in the system to battle stations. Contact Admiral Harrison and tell him to bring the 3rd Fleet back from the Outer Rim immediately. And send a general alert to all Federation member species. It's time they saw what happens when someone threatens the heart of galactic democracy. She turned to Thrix and Elizabeth, her expression grim but determined. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to fight the battle that will determine whether freedom or tyranny rules the galaxy for the next 10,000 years. The Resistance thinks they can prove their point by destroying this station and everyone in it. Let's show them how wrong they are. As alerts sounded throughout Unity Station and Federation ships began taking defensive positions, Rebecca couldn't help but think of Ambassador Sarah Chun, whose execution had started this entire conflict. Sarah had died believing that humanity would continue to fight for freedom no matter the cost. In 6 hours, that belief would be put to the ultimate test. The order of the natural law was coming to destroy the symbol of galactic democracy. But they were about to learn that symbols were much harder to kill than the ideas they represented. And humanity had proven repeatedly that they would fight for their ideals even when the odds seemed impossible. The final battle for the future of galactic civilization was about to begin. Admiral Rebecca Martinez stood on the command bridge of Unity Station as the largest space battle in galactic history unfolded around her. Through the reinforced viewports, she could see the combined might of the order of the natural law. A massive fleet consisting of the survivors from dozens of Council species, their ships retrofitted with captured Federation technology, and driven by the desperate fury of those who had lost everything. Status report. She called to Captain Chun Wei, who was coordinating the station's defenses from the tactical center. Ma'am, enemy fleet strength is approximately 2,000 vessels, including at least 15 Dreadnought-class ships, and what appears to be a modified Valkyrie world killer. His voice was steady, but Rebecca could hear the tension underneath. Federation response fleet is 800 ships strong, with more arriving every hour as our allies respond to the general alert. Rebecca nodded grimly. The numbers were challenging, but not impossible. What concerned her more was the composition of the attacking force. These weren't the demoralized remnants she had expected. They were well-organized, well-equipped, and clearly fighting with the desperation of beings who saw this as their last chance to restore the old order. Any word on the identity of their commander? She asked. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, monitoring communication intercepts from her position at the intelligence station, looked up with a troubled expression. We've confirmed the hierarch's identity, Rebecca. It's High Arbiter Velkash. Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. They had believed the ancient Valkyrie leader was dead, killed in the destruction of their home world during the final battle of the war. But, apparently, the energy being had survived and spent the past 2 years rebuilding their forces and planning this final assault. Ma'am, Captain Chun called urgently. Incoming transmission from the enemy flagship. It's directed specifically at you. Put it through. The main display filled with the image of High Arbiter Velkash, but the ancient energy being looked different now. Where once its form had been stable and controlled, now it flickered with chaotic energy patterns that spoke of barely contained rage and determination. The tentacles of living light that surrounded its core pulsed with colors that Rebecca's eyes could barely process. Admiral Martinez, Velkash's voice carried across the communication channel with cold formality. We meet again under more appropriate circumstances. High Arbiter, Rebecca replied calmly. I have to admit, reports of your death were apparently exaggerated. Death? Velkash's form flared brighter. The Valkyrie do not die as your crude biological forms understand the term. We transform, we evolve, we become. And what I have become, Admiral, is the instrument of galactic correction. Rebecca glanced around the bridge at her mixed human and alien crew, all of whom were listening intently to the exchange. This conversation wasn't just about military tactics. It was being broadcast throughout the galaxy, and both sides knew it. The battle for Unity Station was as much about ideas as it was about weapons. And what exactly do you plan to correct? She asked. The fundamental error of your philosophy, Velkash replied. For 2 years, you have tried to impose your chaotic concepts of equality and self-determination on a galaxy that had achieved perfect order. Look at the results: rebellion, conflict, economic disruption, the breakdown of civilized society. Your Federation has brought nothing but misery to those it claims to protect. Rebecca activated her own communication systems, ensuring that her response would reach every inhabited world in the galaxy. High Arbiter, let me tell you what our Federation has actually accomplished. We have ended the systematic slavery of 43 different species. We have provided education and technology to worlds that had been deliberately kept primitive. We have established governments based on the consent of the governed rather than the arbitrary rule of self-appointed superiors. And, yes, We have faced resistance from those who preferred the old system of oppression. That resistance ends today. Ends. Velkash's laugh was like the sound of solar wind. Admiral, look at your tactical display. We outnumber you more than 2 to 1. Many of your allies have already withdrawn their support as they realize the cost of association with humanity. Even now, as we speak, species throughout the galaxy are reconsidering their membership in your failing federation. This battle will be the final proof that your way leads only to destruction. As if to emphasize the point, the first waves of Order ships opened fire on Unity Station's defensive perimeter. The ancient Council technology, enhanced with captured Federation innovations, proved devastatingly effective against the mixed fleet defending the station. Within minutes, several Federation vessels were destroyed, and the defensive line began to buckle under the assault. But then, something unexpected happened. Instead of the coordinated retreat that Velkash had probably anticipated, the Federation fleet began to fight with a fury and determination that surprised even Rebecca. Ships from dozens of different species, many of them formerly oppressed by the Council, threw themselves into battle against their former oppressors with the desperate courage of beings fighting for their freedom. Admiral, Dr. Harper called from her station. I'm monitoring communications from throughout the galaxy. Species are declaring their support for the Federation faster than I can catalog them. The Regelian Trade Confederation just reversed their withdrawal and pledged their entire merchant fleet to support Unity Station. Even species that never joined the Federation are sending messages of support. Rebecca smiled grimly. Velkash had made the same mistake that tyrants throughout history had always made. They had underestimated the power of an idea whose time had come. By attacking Unity Station directly, the Order hadn't demonstrated Federation weakness. They had reminded the galaxy what was at stake in this conflict. All Federation vessels, she broadcast on the General Command frequency. This is Admiral Martinez. Today we fight not just for Unity Station, not just for the Federation, but for the right of every sentient being in the galaxy to determine their own destiny. The Order of the Natural Law believes that freedom is chaos, that equality is weakness, that cooperation is impossible. Let's prove them wrong. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Federation ships that had been falling back suddenly regrouped and counterattacked with renewed vigor. The Zalani research vessels activated experimental shield technologies they had been developing in secret. The Benexi cargo haulers revealed themselves to be carrying not supplies, but elite commando units that launched boarding actions against Order vessels. Even the converted Theknari diplomatic ships opened hidden weapon ports and joined the battle against their former masters. But it was the human vessels that provided the most dramatic demonstration of what the new Order represented. Instead of fighting as individual ships seeking personal glory, the human fleet fought as a coordinated whole, with each vessel supporting the others and working toward the common goal of protecting Unity Station and its diverse population. Captain Sarah Kim, now commanding the newest human dreadnought UES Sarah Chun, led a squadron of mixed Federation vessels in a direct assault on the Order's command ship. Her voice cut across the tactical networks with calm professionalism as she coordinated the attack. Zalani Squadron, I need you to disrupt their shield harmonics. Benexi Strike Force, hit their weapons arrays while their defenses are down. Human vessels, prepare to exploit the gap they create. The attack unfolded with clockwork precision, each species contributing their unique capabilities to the common effort. Within minutes, the Order's command ship was crippled and drifting, its massive hull scarred by coordinated fire from half a dozen different types of weapons. Impossible, Velkash's voice carried a note of genuine bewilderment. How can inferior species coordinate so effectively? How can chaos produce such order? Rebecca activated her communication system again, her voice carrying to every ship in the battle and every world in the galaxy. It's not chaos, Velkash. It's cooperation. It's what happens when beings work together as equals instead of cowering under the rule of self-appointed superiors. It's what Sarah Chun died trying to teach you, and what we've spent 2 years proving to the galaxy. The battle continued for several more hours, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Order of the Natural Law, for all their sophisticated technology and tactical coordination, were fighting as they had always fought, as a hierarchy where each species was expected to know its place and follow orders without question. The Federation fleet, by contrast, fought as a true alliance where each species contributed their unique strengths while working toward a common goal. As the last order vessels either surrendered or fled into the depths of space, Velkash made one final transmission from the ruins of their command ship. "This is not over, Admiral. The natural order is eternal. Somewhere, somehow, it will rise again. The galaxy cannot survive long under the rule of chaos and equality." Rebecca's response was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Velkash, the natural order you're so fond of died the day you executed Sarah-chan. What we've built in its place is stronger, more resilient, and more just than anything the galaxy has ever seen. And it will endure long after you and I are gone." The transmission cut off, and within hours, the cleanup operations began. Unity Station had suffered damage but remained intact, its diplomatic facilities ready to resume the work of building galactic democracy. The order of the natural law, as an organized resistance movement, had been broken. Some remnants would undoubtedly continue to cause trouble for years to come, but they would never again pose an existential threat to the Federation. But the most significant outcome of the battle wasn't military, it was political. As Dr. Harper's reports confirmed over the following days, the attack on Unity Station had finally convinced the galaxy that the choice between freedom and tyranny was real and immediate. Species that had remained neutral suddenly applied for Federation membership. Worlds that had been considering withdrawal reaffirmed their commitment. Most importantly, the younger generations of even formerly Council species began to embrace the ideals of equality and self-determination. 6 months later, Rebecca stood once again in the observation deck of Unity Station, but this time the view was dramatically different. Instead of a mixed fleet of ships from different species maintaining an uneasy alliance, she saw an integrated force where vessels from dozens of worlds worked together as naturally as if they had been designed for cooperation. The Federation had evolved from a military alliance into something unprecedented in galactic history, a true democratic government representing the interests of hundreds of different species. Ambassador Thrix approached her with a formal document, his blue-green scales showing the satisfaction patterns that his species displayed when important work was completed. "Admiral," he said, "I have the final draft of the Galactic Constitution for your review. It incorporates the input from all 237 member species and establishes the framework for democratic governance that we have been developing." Rebecca accepted the document and scanned its contents, noting the careful balance between individual species' rights and collective responsibility. It was a complex document, necessarily so given the diversity of the Federation's membership, but its core principles were simple and powerful. Every sentient being had the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Governments derived their authority from the consent of the governed. No species had the right to subjugate another. "It's everything Sarah would have wanted," she said quietly. Dr. Harper joined them at the observation window, carrying the latest reports from newly liberated worlds. "The transformation is remarkable, Rebecca. Worlds that had been stagnant under Council rule for millennia are experiencing technological and cultural renaissances. The Kalari have developed new forms of art that incorporate mathematical concepts they learned from human educators. The Benexi have established universities that attract students from across the galaxy. Even former Council species are beginning to embrace innovation and change." Rebecca nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. "And the resistance movements? Are we finally seeing the end of organized opposition to the Federation?" "Mostly," Elizabeth replied. "There are still isolated incidents, groups that refuse to accept the new order, but nothing like the coordinated campaign we faced from Velkash's organization. Most importantly, the support for resistance is drying up as people see the benefits of democratic government." Ambassador Thrix gestured toward the space outside the station, where construction crews from a dozen different species were working together to expand Unity Station's facilities. "The real test will come in the next generation," he observed. "Children who grow up under the Federation system, educated in principles of equality and cooperation, will either validate or reject the choices we have made. Rebecca smiled, remembering a conversation she'd had with Sarah Chin years before, back when humanity was still trying to find its place in galactic society. Sarah had argued that the greatest gift they could give the galaxy wasn't technology or military power, but simply the example of what free beings could accomplish when they worked together. Sarah was right, she said aloud. The war isn't really over. It probably never will be completely. But we've changed the fundamental question from who has the right to rule to how can we build a society that serves everyone. That's a victory worth fighting for. As if to emphasize her point, a priority message arrived from Earth with news that would have seemed impossible just a few years before. The galaxy had learned what humanity had tried to teach them, that freedom was worth fighting for, that equality was possible even among very different species, and that the greatest strength came not from ruling others but from empowering them to rule themselves. High Arbiter Velkash had been wrong about one thing. The natural order was not eternal. It could be changed, it could be improved, and it could be replaced with something better. The Galactic Federation was proof that even the most entrenched tyranny could be overcome by beings who refused to accept that oppression was inevitable. The war that had begun with the execution of a single human diplomat had ended with the transformation of galactic civilization. And the principles that Sarah Chun had died defending, freedom, equality, and the rights of all sentient beings, had become the foundation for a new age of prosperity and cooperation that would endure for generations to come. The galaxy had finally learned that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. And humanity had proven that sometimes the greatest victory came not from destroying your enemies, but from helping them become something better than they had ever imagined they could be.